Okay, so having reconnoitered with rheology Bob this morning, we now move on to Mighty Bob. And his career over the last 17 years in the leadership of the MIT Energy Initiative. And of course, as the director for the last 10 years. I have had the honor of serving under Bob as the Deputy Director for Science and Technology for that whole time. And quickly became the much younger half of the team that became known as Rob and Bob, and especially over the last several years. Sort of this sharp-elbowed Robin to Bob's overburdened Batman. And I've noted since taking over Bob's responsibilities this summer that my colleagues have begun to refer to this as the good old days. And I have to say, since I'm operating without a deputy, with only one deputy, I should say, sorry, Chris, I know no one more than me, I would say. Since its founding in 2006, Mighty has played a central role at MIT in energy science, technology, policy, and outreach. But it's a role that's changed over time. Today, what we're going to do is walk you through Mighty's history, and also talk about technology, because this is MIT, and policy, and take a look at also the unsolved problems that still lie before us, and perhaps peer briefly into the future of what might happen at MIT as we think about how to address it as a community. Many of you will know that Mighty came into existence thanks to our former president, Susan Hockfield, who of course is also a professor of neurology here at MIT still. And so Susan will be our first speaker, and I'd like to call her up now to explain why. Susan.
Thanks, Rob. I have to say one of the real joys of being part of an academic enterprise is that it's constant learning. So I'm really thrilled, delighted, honored to join the celebration of Bob Armstrong's career and contributions. And I have to say it's a particular honor to be invited to open this segment on Bob's role in launching and leading MIT's Energy Initiative. So I've been asked to speak about the circumstances of founding the MIT Energy Initiative. And I have to tell you, it's a story I'm more than happy to share. I probably tell it too many times to too many people because it's such a fantastic story of people gathering together around an incredibly important ambition and making it happen. So, and in a sense, this is a story that conveys not just the specifics of the founding of the MIT Energy Initiative, but in it, it illustrates so much that's central to MIT and really makes MIT the remarkable and unusually wonderful place that it is. So meeting Bob was one of the happy consequences of my joining MIT as president in late 2004. And this may not be what you would naturally think, but coming to MIT as a president from another institution rather than from inside MIT was really my great good fortune. Not just that I came to MIT, but that I was from outside. It gives you permission to ask things, say things, not know things that you won't have if you are from the inside. And our new president, Sally Kornbluth, is in the midst of having the same experience as I had. Now, of course, coming from outside, MIT presents some challenges an insider wouldn't have. But I have to say, those challenges also come with great benefits. So chief among the benefits are the intrinsic permission to wander broadly through MIT's incredible range of activities and people. It gives you a freedom to inquire about anything and everything. MIT's treasure trove of amazing people and projects could infinitely delight any curious person. Well, maybe not any curious person, but certainly those of us who are curious in the way that people at MIT are curious. From my election as president by the MIT Corporation in late August 2004, I started my listening and learning tour to gather as much information as I could about MIT as fast as possible. There was, of course, a lot to learn, but I enjoyed the great advantage of being new and asking people to simply tell me about MIT and explain things that were not immediately obvious to me. So I don't need to remind any of you that the reason we become academic researchers and teachers is because we all share this incredible experience of having absolutely insatiable curiosity about the world around us. While over the course of our careers, we define an area of focus or an area defines us, our curiosity knows no bounds. As MIT's new president, I had the opportunity to indulge my crazily broad curiosity in conversation with faculty, students, staff, alumni, corporation members, and well beyond that. I had a very long list of people that I absolutely had to meet, and that list was constantly amplified by just the casual conversations with people I would meet as I was walking around campus. So after trying out a few introductory strategies for these conversations, when you're having a conversation with the new president, I guess it's important that the new president actually offers some introduction to let you speak. I reduced my opening question to a very simple: what are MIT's greatest opportunities and responsibilities over the next decade? Now, MIT is somewhat unique in a number of parameters, but it includes how we've identified fertile areas for our study and also having a deeply held sense of purpose, of service, of our responsibility to contribute to solving the world's most pressing problems. That simple question about MIT's opportunities and responsibilities proved to be an incredibly effective catalyst for a massive download of amazing and inspiring thoughts. Now, there were dozens, literally dozens of really interesting and important directions we could pursue. However, coming in first, and this is, fall of 2004, spring of 2005, by a huge margin, was I heard a call for MIT to put its weight more heavily into solving the world's energy challenge. I was astonished by the consistency, the homogeneity of that response. And on hearing that interest, dare I call it a passion, and I think it is a passion for most, many times, heard it many, many times, I soon started to follow that response with a question about action. So if we were to pursue energy, what would or could MIT do? And almost everyone I asked had a favorite project or topic or several of them, most of which were actionable. But they were doing these projects in their bottom drawer, the back closet. They said, in the last energy crisis, I started this work. It's really important. I haven't been able to get funding for it now, but it's so important, I'm continuing it anyway. So that question revealed a passion among our community that had already been put into action in small ways. Not infrequently, I heard about a project that had been started many years before, but needed additional support. It needed money, it needed enthusiasm to move it from the back closet to the front lab bench. Importantly and astonishingly to me, I heard that passion to advance our efforts against the challenge of energy across all of MIT, not just in the schools of science and engineering where you'd expect it, but also at MIT Sloan, in the schools of humanities, arts, and social sciences, and the School of Architecture and Planning. The unanimity of ambition and interest, along with a tremendously good match between what MIT could do and what the world needed, made the decision to embark on an institute-wide energy initiative a very obvious direction. However, as you all know well, a good idea, even a very good idea, with broad and enthusiastic support, is not sufficient for success. Success requires great leadership, and MIT had the great good fortune to have two great leaders at the ready and willing. Bob Armstrong and Ernie Moniz agreed to take on the invention of the MIT Energy Initiative. Lots could be said, and I guess Ernie will probably say much of it about the initiative, and I'm only going to mention three of my sources of greatest pride about the MIT Energy Initiative. First, MITey from its outset was deliberately designed as a campus-wide initiative. It garnered participation from across the institute. It catalyzed collaborations between people in different departments and different schools. One measure of the participation that we elicited is that when I stepped down from the presidency in 2012, by that time, 25% of MIT faculty had received funding and had participated in the energy initiative. And for those of you who are from academy, you know you don't get 25% of your faculty to do anything together, but we did. 1/4 of MIT faculty. And the energy initiative went well beyond research. It included a new educational model for our students who wanted to be energy professionals or wanted to know more about energy. We created a new energy minor, a new species at MIT that was designed to partner with any MIT major. Second, the energy initiative included an absolutely brilliant and absolutely essential collaboration with industry. At MIT, we have truly great and important ideas coming out of our departments, schools, and programs. But solutions to a problem as large and as complex as choreographing the energy transition require deployment at scale. And the university faculty don't do scale very well. But MITE's Industry Partners program brought much needed expertise to design how to deploy great ideas. It gave us industry partners. We've enjoyed a truly remarkable collaboration between institute and industry, which is absolutely essential for finding solutions for the real world. And I likely don't need to point out for this audience that MIT's embrace of both the academy and industry, as it has in the past, enabled MIT's energy initiative to explore a wider range of topics and to advance discoveries from theory into practice. Bob played an absolutely essential role in engaging industry partners, and it's been essential and entirely awesome. One final reflection on the power and the outcomes of the energy initiative. On my early listening and learning tour that I described at the outset, I heard another commonly held concern among far too many members of the MIT community. It first came to my attention in a meeting with a faculty member who had done an experiment. So this faculty member carried around with them on campus a board that was basically an archery target. And he would approach anyone on campus and ask them to place themselves on this archery target where they sat on the target relative to the center of MIT, which of course was the bullseye. Far too many people expressed a sense of isolation, a lack of community, a feeling very distant from the center of action and what mattered. They didn't place themselves on those distant orange or green circles. They placed themselves off the target entirely. Thanks to Bob's and Ernie's brilliant leadership, the Energy Initiative provided a powerful sense of shared ambition across the entire institute, among those who participated and those might not have participated, and it extended to our alumni. The initiative's many lectures and activities, along with its recurring calls for proposals across an amazingly wide range of topics and technologies, brought the campus's attention to one of the world's most pressing challenges and MIT's work to address it. Everyone, whether they received funding from MIT or not, felt part of an important and exciting effort. And I'm just going to give you one example of a conversation that was repeated dozens of times, conversations like it. So late one afternoon, I was walking down the second floor of Building 10 where my office was, and I stopped to talk with a member of the facilities department who was sweeping up the dust and detritus of that day, as I tended to do. I will talk to anyone I pass in a corridor. And in the course of that conversation, he told me how proud he was to work at a place that was helping the world solve such an important problem as energy. The Energy Initiative brought a sense of pride in purpose and sense of belonging across the entire institute among those who were directly involved and well beyond. One last observation about all those calls for proposals for MITE funding. Among the first lessons I learned from a member of the MIT community, a faculty member, when I had first come to MIT. He reminded me that when you're herding cats, cat food helps. You all will know who the cats are and where the cat food comes from in this analogy. Bob and Ernie brought a whole lot of cat food to MIT. They garnered support from many sources to build and to join MIT's energy initiative. But to my mind, the most important resource they brought to the initiative was the power of convening around a pressing, complex, and critically important challenge, knowing that MIT could help bend the curve to the energy future we all need. Bob, thank you for your amazing, incredible, astonishing service to MIT in many different dimensions. But for me, your leadership for the Energy Initiative has been and always will be absolutely legendary. Cannot thank you enough. And I get the pleasure of introducing Ernie Moniz, Bob's co-conspirator in the Energy Initiative. I'm not going to go through all of the marvelous things Ernie has done, but he remains on the faculty at MIT as a special advisor to the president, the next president, but he doesn't hesitate to give advice to past presidents either, I can tell you. But he has served the nation remarkably well in important roles. And Ernie, it is just a privilege to introduce you to this group.
Well, thanks, Susan, and thanks, Bob. Well, we'll come back to that. And thank Deb. I think I saw her here somewhere as well. But Susan obviously talked about a bit about the why, and I'm supposed to say a little bit about the what. But first, let me just say that Susan didn't just kick off Mighty; she stuck with Mighty through her entire presidency. And I might say to today, through the advisory committee to Mighty. And I think Bob and I both really appreciated and benefited from the top cover that we always had, knowing that the leadership of the Institute was firmly behind the initiative and ready to pitch in at any time to help us. So I think it was really a three-way partnership there. And I'll also say that Susan, as an example of that, I mean, she picked up the phone, called George Shultz, the remarkable George Shultz, and we were able to recruit him as the initial chair of the advisory committee. And we did think initial meant maybe we'll get 3 years out of George. Well, George stayed with that until his 99th year and was just incredibly enthusiastic. Indeed, when he passed away in February 2021, Susan and I did an op-ed. I don't know if you remember that, Susan, pointing out in the Boston Globe that George was rightfully being discussed very, very broadly for his national security, foreign affairs expertise. But we had to point out, wait a minute, he was also an environmentalist, a technologist, and very, very engaged with us and Stanford in terms of what he called breakthrough technologies. So anyway, turning to now back to the history, and I can personally not elaborate but reinforce Susan's description of her listening tour because she kind of said "Eureka" when we spoke at that time. But in mid-2005, we've heard 2006 mentioned several times as the beginning of Mighty, quite accurately. However, in 2005, Susan brought Bob and me together to lead a faculty group to design what became Mighty. So it really goes back to that, and 18 years as a tag team does create a certain kind of bonding experience, but nothing like the bonding experience that you've already heard a little bit of, which was the time that I walked by the middle of the campus and the department head of chemical engineering, Bob, was sitting looking extremely smug and extremely dry on top of a large pool of water. Now, I know you heard a little bit about this from Paula, but I wanted to say that the grad students were collecting, I think, $1 for 3 baseballs, and you had to throw it from, I don't know, 15 or 20 feet and hit a little button. I very confidently took 1 baseball. You saw the picture, I believe. And I can tell you that even 18 years ago, Bob did not need a hairdryer, despite his drenched appearance. I did warn him that I had played a lot of baseball. I had been a relief pitcher, but I think I gave that warning after you were in the tank. So anyway, c'est la vie. I'm pleased to say that Bob is now the longest-serving Mitei director, and I'm the shortest-serving in time director. So now we're at the time with this kind of original duo, if you like, handing over the baton at Mitei 2.0. So I think it's a good time to go back and to recall the construct that we and our faculty colleagues came up with. And I might say that in addition to that group, once we got going, several people who are here today, like John Deutsch and Paul Joskow, soon after Dick Schmalensee. Actually, I want to also mention Carl Koster, who's here because of the strong industrial collaborations we had. We're all part of the central advisory team from the beginning. But in the design of Mitei, it's clear that the group and Bob and I certainly came quickly to knowing that we had to build around 3 key advantages of MIT. I might say the focus, one of them was focusing on solutions, which we think is an MIT characteristic. So in this case, the climate challenge, frankly, I'm exaggerating slightly, but it was more or less just pocketed. I mean, we wanted to address the solutions in the clean energy space. So that was the first thing, and that had us focused right down on energy. Secondly, of course, MIT, among universities, has arguably the strongest tradition of multidisciplinary research. The very organization of research on the campus has such strong cross-disciplinary components. And if you're ever going to address energy, Susan more or less said this, you had to focus on bringing together people across the entire institute, all 5 schools, at least at that time, 5 schools. So that meant that the School of Humanities and Arts and Social Sciences, the School of Architecture and Urban Planning, really had to be central to the effort, as well as science, engineering, and management. And finally, clearly MIT has in its DNA, really going back to its founding, working with industry. And so again, we rapidly came to the focus that, if you want to have solutions, you go to the place where the solutions are going to, in the end, be implemented. And in the energy space, an activity that pervades everything we do in society, we were going to go to industry with kind of the central construct. That is not always a very popular idea in academia. Clearly, at MIT, there is what I would call much less resistance to that idea than you would find at many academic institutions. But I can also assure you, and I think Bob would reaffirm, that did not nevertheless have us escape from certain observations about this organization. And looking back at it, I think we would both agree absolutely the right choice to do this and to forge new ways of frankly bringing the university, if anything, even closer to the marketplace in order to affect serious solutions. Now, these choices, which may seem obvious, but as Susan said, needs to bring together a lot of different perspectives, did lead, obviously, had consequences in terms of the implementation scheme. And especially if one tries to transport oneself back 18 years, there were a lot of novel elements in this implementation scheme of Mitei. For one thing, we did not choose what was the standard default option, what you might call a members model. You know, you get a bunch of companies, they put a little money in, they pool it all, and you have a few workshops during the year, and you call it a success. That's not what we did. We took, frankly, a much more management-intensive approach of centering the relationship with Company X around a core research portfolio that they carried out in collaboration with one or more faculty members and senior researchers, which meant that, and I think Bob and I have often said that we ran MIT's biggest dating service because our job was really to understand not only the core activities of companies, but also their adjacencies heading to a clean energy future with the interests of faculty across the Institute and bring them together, sometimes a blind date, sometimes not, and see what happened. More often than not, something happened. And that was critical, that most of the resources committed by these companies were going to what you might call a bilateral research relationship with standard MIT IP terms, not special terms, standard terms. And that led, especially because many of the projects would be in what we call the adjacencies, that led to many different ways of the follow-up on successful projects, including, for example, equity stakes in startup companies. So that was really a very, very core thing. By the way, on the adjacency, a good example, an obvious major example, was the E&I Advanced Solar Technology Center that was established. That's just one example. So, as I said, the companies could also use the IP rights, if you like, in creative ways. But then it was very important, particularly to implement some of those core principles like campus-wide activity. It was very important that there be a component of the company's engagement in a pooled activity or activities. So, number one among those, I would have to put, and Susan referred to it, the Mitei Seed Fund proposals. I don't know, Bob, how many seed fund proposals have now been given out over the history? 200? Maybe 200, 150,000 a pop, typically. These were just open calls for ideally novel proposals to start out some new research direction, kickstart issues. The contributing companies, we'd have maybe like 15 companies could be in the room in like an NIH style proposal evaluation round, give and take, with principles understood to include diversity of subjects being supported, preference for spanning the institute, preference for faculty who, while of course all distinguished in their research areas, perhaps had never engaged in the energy sector. We had a department head in the School of Science, biology, for example, whose first energy foray in the biofuels arena came from a seed fund. And my favorite one was the time when we had a proposal out of EECS, a distinguished young faculty member had done some incredibly novel work, put forward such a novel seed fund proposal involving energy efficiency and advanced computation that it led us to ask the question of the assembled group at the end of the meeting, does anybody understand what's being proposed? Uniformly no. The industry people, us, the MIT people, we just didn't understand it. Unanimously, he was funded because this was exactly the kind of person you wanted to bring into this into this area. So it really, I mean, I think it's those anecdotes that I think kind of, to me, are the real indicators of success, and very, very popular program, to put it mildly. Now, another area of these pooled resources that was very important was providing graduate fellowships, mostly for incoming students, incoming graduate students, although not universally because of the particular department practices and processes, et cetera. But that was mainly it. But the key here was, and remarkably, the companies bought it, that they would be putting part of their resource into supporting graduate student fellowships, and they would pick the department where half of their fellowships would be assigned, the other half going into our pool of fellows. And that was critical because that's how Bob and I could assure that these fellowships were going to all 5 schools, including SHAS, including architecture and science, engineering, and management. And that was really, really very, very important. I could also say as an anecdote that in the first year, see, again, our view was that we were there trying to help departments and labs and centers pursue this goal. And so the first year, when we called, let's say, a particular department and said, congratulations, we're giving you 5 graduate fellowships for incoming students who show some interest in energy. How are you going to pick them? No, we're not picking them. You're picking them. We don't admit graduate students. You admit graduate students. On and on and on. What are the strings attached? And then they realized there were no strings attached. Next year, boy, did that department head call early. How many do you think we're going to get this year? We're planning, et cetera, et cetera. So again, this kind of commons, the companies really liked it, and it was very, very important for achieving the core objectives that we had. And then Susan mentioned education, and I would just add one little factoid to what she said, and that was that when that was offered, I think it really immediately shot up to the #2 minor at MIT, well behind management and engineering, of course, which was a well-established and understandable professional kind of thing. But it really shot up, and our education people did a fabulous job in working with the faculty on that. Finally, I'll also mention the MIT Future of Studies. Now, John Deutsch and I had initiated this with the publication of Future of Nuclear Power in 2003. But Mitei then gladly and effectively brought in that string of studies, which still goes on under the Mitei umbrella, which really made execution much, much easier. But what I want to stress really is that, like Mitei itself, the future of studies were not typical academic exercises. They were not aimed for peer-reviewed publications. They were aimed at technically grounded policy conclusions, successfully, it turns out. Although the publications themselves did lay out actionable R&D agendas and other system study agendas that could lead to traditional, if you like, academic activities. But this was, again, based upon experience with how the world works, et cetera. I think a very important signature that grew very, very close to Mitei almost immediately, and again remains in effect. So all of this really did lead to MIT and Mitei as kind of a go-to place for thinking about the clean energy transition, central to mitigating climate change. And I believe that this basic template, which is often not articulated in terms of its multiple dimensions, remains quite valid at this inflection point now in terms of Mitei's management. President Kornbluth, as Susan indicated, has made a commitment in the climate clean energy space, I would say similar to that made by President Hockfield back in 2005, 18 years ago. Still timely indeed, if anything. We all know that we are not in a position where we can slow down the pace. We have to pick up the pace if we are going to address the issues around climate. But again, I think for MIT, continuing a hard focus on solutions is what is quite central. So I'll end by thanking Bob again, but also in doing so by relating one more anecdote. We have all grown accustomed, and many in the outside world have grown accustomed to the name MIT Energy Initiative. That was not an obvious name in 2005 or 2006. In fact, Susan may deny it, but it's true that when we went to her with our faculty report and our design, her statement, probably stated a bit more nicely, was, "What the hell is this energy initiative?" And the point is, right from the beginning, we insisted that we did not want to be named department or center or lab. We did not want the antibodies to come into effect that you would get in a complex organization with that kind of approach. We wanted to emphasize, our goal was to help, again, the faculty, the students, the departments, the centers, the laboratories, expand their effort in clean energy. And secondly, we stated, not very nicely, to the president, look, you evaluate in a few years, I think we said 5 years, whether Mitei is effective. And if it's not, we want you to be able to put a bullet through its head without having the kind of usual administrative, relic that is hard to dispose of. That comes to the thanks to Bob. There's been no bullet in the head. And I think, Bob, it's an indicator, I think, of the continuing success that you've had, that the organization has had in moving forward. Thank you.
Well, there's a lot to reflect on there as we think about the future of Mitei, and thank you, Ernie. We'll have to talk more. It's not easy to outdo Ernie. Someone as brilliant and energetic and accomplished is just sort of at a different place than most of us. But I will say this: I'm the shortest duration director of Mitei, Ernie, and in this sense, you're merely average. We're going to move on now to talk about technology with a panel that will be chaired by Alan. Where's Alan? Oh, there's Alan. Okay, Alan Hatton, And could I ask then the panelists to come up? Vladimir Vulovich. Oh yeah, that's the wrong panel. Well, you know you're a panel. Yeah. Alan is the Ralph Landau Professor of Chemical Engineering and the very long-serving and dedicated director of the Chemical Engineering Practice School. Welcome, Alan.